Hello, I'm Jonathan Dodd, and it's been my privilege for the past 8 years to work with the estate of Georges Follmer, a French artist who died in 1977. He was a high intellectual in the great European tradition. In the 1930s, he shared a studio with a theoretical mathematician. By the 1940s, his works were informed by that mathematician, so that he came to the conclusion, as did many others of the time, that the world was comprised of dodecahedrons. And it's reflected in his love of music and his fondness for Schoenberg, for instance, who, with his theory of dodecaphony, based around the 12 main notes of music. With the 1950s, Follmer's work became almost entirely abstract. That is based around mathematics and geometry with no relationship directly to the natural world. He started producing constructions, that is, three-dimensional works that are neither moulded nor carved, but are put together rather in the way of IKEA kits. And in the 60s, he added to that the idea, the dimension of movement. Here's a very important rotopeinture from 1962, which moves. It's a very democratic system. It enables the artist and viewer to create an almost infinite number of chance coincidences, the meeting of form and colour. This one is based around 2 panels. And you can create a series of random coincidences of lines, shapes, touch, nearly touch, and you can create very democratically your own work, which of course has been foreseen by the artist and anticipated by him. One assumes with artists like Follmer that there's a dryness, but in fact there's a wit to these works, there's a humour to these works that is actually found in a very few abstract work of this time. There's a lightness of touch to them. There is one particular rotopeinture that exists in Paris, still with its original 1960s French motor to it, which emits sparks and a really horrible noise as it turns. Personally, I find this one much more restful.
My name is Philippa Willison and I work in the Contemporary and Modern British Department at the Gallery, and I've been here for coming up to 5 years. I'm going to talk about Coastal Light No. 2. This is a recent work by the contemporary artist Martin Brewster, who we represent at Waterhouse and Dodd. Martin has been, he studied at Hertfordshire and Brighton Colleges of Art, gaining an MA in 1975, and he went on to get a postgraduate diploma after that in printmaking, where he got a distinction. His work is in numerous collections in public and private collections, including the National Trust, the British Museum, the V&A, and the Russell Coates Museum. We've exhibited his work widely, including France, Spain, the UK, and over in America. I think what's lovely about this painting is that he's using lighter and a softer palette, which he has, in the past, he's tended to use darker, heavier colours. And I think he wanted to experiment with the idea of adding more light into his paintings. So Dorset is bathed in this beautiful light. And Martin said that Dorset's always been very important to him. He made a conscious decision to move out of London, and he made a conscious decision to also live somewhere that was close to the sea. He wanted a place where he could paint and do printmaking, but also somewhere where he could go for walks and absorb the atmosphere of the countryside and the subtleties in the landscape. In the past, he's tended to use painted with more oils on canvas, whereas here he's using more acrylic and this collage element, which he says is more exciting for him because he can create more movement, different forms, dynamic forms and shapes, and it's quite an exciting development in his work. The other thing is that he thinks what's really important from a painting is that there's an emotional element to it. So when you're looking at his work, whether it creates a feeling of sadness or beauty or wonder or joy. And I think that in this particular work, with these lighter tones, there's kind of happiness to it, which is reminiscent of those coastal walks and that lovely Dorset light.
Hello, my name is Adrian Bedell and I'm delighted to have recently joined Waterhouse and Dodd. The picture I'm in front of is a wonderful example by Alfred Reth. Alfred Reth was a Hungarian, one of a small clutch of leading Hungarian artists who came to Paris in the first decade of the 20th century. Others amongst them include Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Joseph Zaki, the influential Cubist sculptor. Reth, in particular, was very influenced by Cézanne. Cézanne died in 1906, and he had a major retrospective in the following year, in 1907, that coloured a number of artists approached their work, Reth amongst them. Clearly, he was also influenced by Picasso and Braque and those early years of Cubism. I think other artists who influenced him were the Futurists. The Futurist Manifesto had been pronounced in 1910, and there's a very strong dynamic element in this, and there's a very strong sense of the dynamism, the modernism that is the hallmark of Futurism, and that desire to record and indeed celebrate the machine age. This, in fact, is the interior of a restaurant. It's called the Restaurant Urbain. The Restaurant Urbain was a series of of interiors that he did in 1912 and 1913. This one dated 1913. You see how he has directs our attention through the use of these very dynamic diagonals which structure the paint surface. All the different elements that he brings in, whether it's the still life over here with the coffee pot, possibly the fruit here, very clearly the tables, the tablecloths here, this side table here. It looks as though some people are entering from the left over here. The steam that comes out of the top of the coffee pot here, almost as right at the top of the composition. It's an extremely strong work. 1913 was the year that Reth had a major exhibition at the Galerie der Stern in Berlin, and the Restaurant Urbain featured prominently in that exhibition. And really, this series of works, of which this is a very good example, is as I say, the absolute apogee of Reth's work, Cubist work, before the outbreak of the First World War.
I'm Jamie Anderson. I want to talk to you about Dorothy Mead and the Dorothy Mead self-portrait we have here, which dates from around 1974, a time when she was the first female president of the London Group. This work was sourced directly from the estate less than 2 weeks ago, which is why it doesn't have a frame. Dorothy Mead was one of Bomberg's pupils at the Borough Polytechnic, although she first encountered him as a 16-year-old student at the South Essex School of Art, where she took immediate dislike to his methods of teaching and actually wrote a letter of complaint to the Dean of the college. Despite this, Bomberg's assertion of freedom of expression and his disdain for academic tradition of art teaching soon appealed to Mead's radical spirit, and she followed him to the Borough Polytechnic in 1945, where she was joined by like-minded artists like Miles Richmond here and Cliff Holden. Although she won the Figure Prize in 1958 and the Steer Prize for landscape painting in the same year, she left in 1959 without so much as a diploma. She was every bit as single-minded as her first teacher. Bomberg asked his students to concentrate on representing the spirit in the maths. They were to avoid replicating superfluous detail, and instead they concentrated on capturing the essence of the subject. So in this self-portrait we get a sense of quiet reflection and also of subtle movement. You get an idea of the artist's melancholy at this time, but you also get a sense of her determination. She was at the time a well-respected tutor at Goldsmiths College, a very macho, male-orientated environment. Despite this being very much Mead's own style, there is close links with Bomberg's own late portraits, particularly works like Vigilante, which is currently in the Tate's collection.